Recording in progress.
My name is Sarah Jacobs. Today is April 14th. The time is 1:32. We are at the Pewaukee VFW. I'm interviewing John H. Farrow, who was born on January 23rd, 1935 in Chicago, Illinois, and served in the Cold War between June 1st, 1956 and June 2nd, 1960. John Farrow was a lieutenant in the Navy and served as a ship's engineer officer on the USS John W. Thomason. This interview is sponsored by the Bell Tower Memorial. So, can you tell me a little bit about your life before joining the service?
My wife, well, actually, I was in high school, and then I went through college on a Navy ROTC scholarship, and the Navy paid my books, tuition, $50 a month, and let me have some wonderful summer vacations, like learning how to holy stone. And that comes from the fact that the brick, and you do it kneeling down, and so it looks like you're praying.
Did you have any different career plans before going into the service? Did you ever think about anything else?
Uh, Not really. Um, I'm had a I'm majored in electrical engineering, and I figured I'd get a job in that. Then when I got the scholarship, I knew I would have a ship or something to do for at least 3 years. I was obligated for 3 years, and I can tell stories about that.
Can you tell me a little bit about your early weeks of training and how you adapted to military life?
Um, yeah, I really it didn't adapt to military life. Kind of while I was in college. That was doing it. And then each summer we would go on cruise, and that's when I really kind of began to learn. We would uh, uh, the summer between freshman and sophomore year, we learned what the enlisted people did, and then between sophomore and junior year, we spent 3 weeks in Virginia in amphibious warfare, and then sometime in Corpus Christi, Texas, where we learned about the air arm of the Navy. And then between junior year and senior year, we kind of shadowed an officer and learned what he did.
So, about your time in basic training, what was something that was really something you looked forward to, and what did you enjoy about it?
Oh, just I guess the fact that when you're on a ship, you develop, I think, a special camaraderie, because there's just your crewmates, and miles of ocean.
Yeah. So then, after your time in basic training, what kind of skills did you learn at emergency ship handling school?
Oh, I learned a little bit about. Again, it goes to commands to the rudder and things like that. And at one point, The exact. I was on a list of officers going to emergency ship handling school in San Diego, where they have a computerized ship handling. And I said to him, I said, Commander, how come I'm on this list? I haven't been up on the bridge in years. And he said, John, if you have to handle the ship, it will be an emergency.
So, can you tell me a little bit about the kinds of emergencies that you planned for?
Uh, we did an awful lot of training. What happens? For example, uh, the ship had 4 boilers. It needed one to get up to about 18 knots. I don't know what that comes out to be, but and then to get up to 32, we required all four boilers. And most of the training there was simulated problems, like, oh, we blew a gasket in a main steam line and things like that. And what are you supposed to do and who does what?
Did any of those emergencies you planned for actually happen?
Uh, I only remember, really, I only remember one. And that was we were cruising on one boiler in the middle of the night, and we ended up getting a bubble of water when we refueled. And believe it or not, water does not burn well. And so I got so used to noise. When I'm familiar with a noise, fine. Any noise that was unfamiliar was trouble. And it was in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden, I couldn't hear the blowers going. I sound asleep. Got up, put on my shoes, um, grabbed the flashlight, turned around, and ran into a wall, a bulkhead. And what had happened is we had picked up a slug of water, but we had practiced all kinds of things, and so we immediately went to. We had a diesel operated generator to take care of the electrics, and then we had a way of draining the steam lines, and eventually we put things back together, and everything was copacetic.
Nice.
And an upshot of this is when we were back in San Diego, one night, my wife and I were in bed, sound asleep, and we had a hot water heater in this 1 bedroom apartment, and it stopped running. Scared the heck out of my wife because I was up and I had a flashlight and I'm running around looking for something and I didn't know what, but I knew that something was wrong.
Mhm.
And finally I traced it down.
So, back to your time on the USS John W. Thomason, what was the adjustment like to being at sea for you?
Being at sea, um, actually, it wasn't until I was out of the Navy and my wife and I and some other people were on a cruise. She was on a computer a quilting cruise, and I realized then that when you get up every day and all you see are blue sky, blue water, and gray ships, it's very boring.
I bet. But other than that, going into it, it was relatively easy for you?
Yes, I would say the one of the more difficult things was my father. I had to convince him this was a good thing, and my father graduated from West Point, so we had a little bit of interfamily reactions back and forth between Army and Navy, but other than that, we had fun. I would say uh, I feel that uh, everyone should spend some time in the service or some operation thereof. Uh, it's you learn discipline, and more important, you learn self-discipline, and you learn how to depend on others. But yet, one of the most important things I learned is that you can delegate authority. Like I can say, okay, now you're in charge of doing this, but you can't delegate responsibility.
Mhm.
So if you don't do your job, well, I'm in trouble.
Right.
And so that's a very interesting thing. And it's helped me through life.
Yeah. When you were on the ship, were there ever times where you didn't know where you were or where you were going?
Uh, yeah, that's why they didn't let me navigate. um, yeah, I knew where we were going. Like knew we were going to New Zealand, but I could not tell you whether we were going to Auckland or I don't know what the other places are in New Zealand. And it was because we did go to Auckland,
Mhm.
and again learned quite a bit.
So when your ship was in port, what were your responsibilities?
Uh, to make sure everything kept running, even even if I was home at home, I was still responsible for what went on and what tried to keep people going.
Mhm.
And I can tell interesting stories. One of the stories I can tell, I think, is that I had out in the engineering department, I had one kid. I used to call them my kids, even though they were all older than me. But one of my kids uh, got his first pair of shoes when he went to boot camp.
Wow.
He was born and raised in the boondocks out in Middle Tennessee or somewhere like that, and never had shoes until he got in the Navy.
Wow. So when you were the head of the engineering department, what was that experience like for you?
Oh, it was worry about things, and just the fact that I was responsible for those things, and it was a lot of responsibility, and yet uh, the Navy and my skipper uh, put enough faith in me that they felt I could do the job, and I think that was a major factor, and other things uh, like I don't know if you've ever been down to the Great Lakes or anything. At night, they have aviation warning lights at the top of the mast, way up there. There are two little red lights so that airplanes don't fly into your mast.
Mm-hmm.
And again, a light burned out. And so we didn't have our light. And the electrician said, well, that's no problem. And he said, the problem is that I can't go up there alone because there are all these antennas for stuff and this and that. And I said, well, gee, I have a degree in electrical engineering, so I can climb up that mast with you. And I just stayed there. The idea behind that was if he got caught by the electricity between antennas and things,
Mm.
somebody had to be there to grab him and pull him loose
Yeah.
because otherwise he would have electrocuted himself. And so that was the kind of things. I got all kinds of funny little stories that I can tell.
Yeah. Do you have any other memories that stand out to you when you were the head of that department?
Uh, I shouldn't tell you this. But this same young fellow, a little background. The ship and the men in it required fresh water.
Mm-hmm.
The ocean is salt water. So we had what we call the evaporators, where you evaporated the seawater and then it condensed into puddles of fresh water, and that's what we used for the boiler and for the men. And anyhow, this same fella that uh, the shoes. Um, uh, I used to get more fresh water than any other fella in the department that was responsible for running the evaporators. And I asked him one time, I said, how come you get so much more fresh water? And he says, well, Mr. Farrow, um, these aren't too complicated. He said, isn't much more complicated than my pappy still back in Tennessee. And boy, the Navy will never hire me as a join up. And anyhow, then he said, when we're swinging out at a buoy, we have one boiler lit off so that we can run the generator and all this other kind of stuff. And he said, sometime when we're out like that, if you keep everybody out of the forward engine room, so that I'm the only one there, he said, "You and me'll have enough money to retire, because I'll brew up some brew and we'll sell it to the rest of the crew." I said, "Oh, sorry, can't do that." But uh, it was good. I learned, as I said, the biggest thing I learned was the idea of responsibility and what that means.
Hmm.
And
Like, what kind of responsibility did you feel in your role?
uh, I felt that it was up to me to make sure that it never got dark and quiet on the ship. And it's something that's very interesting, and it's well worth the experience. The experience has helped me in industry innumerable times.
Yeah. So, what was it like being in close quarters with the same people for such an extended period of time?
That's where you have to know that everybody is really pulling their own weight, number one. And number two, uh, you kind of give people a break. You can't do everything. You can't stop everything. You have to do what is important and what isn't. And otherwise, you could just run up chasing nothing.
Did you ever have any experiences where you had issues with other people on the ship?
Yeah, yes, yes. Um, we had an operations officer. Uh, if you looked in the book, the head department heads, uh, uh, the operations officer was a full lieutenant, and that was a slot for a full lieutenant, which is the equivalent of an Army or an Air Force captain.
Hmm.
And you'll notice that three of the four department heads were lieutenant junior grade, which would be the same thing as first lieutenant. And so we were all kind of young. It was like a floating fraternity house, kind of. But it was neat. It was good. It was the experience was well worth it. The people I have met have been well worth it. Uh, for example, uh, we were due to get back in the United States sometime around Christmas time, and uh, I was supposed to get married on the 29th of December. And then I had a boiler inspection that had to be taken. And uh, my chief, I don't know what they call them, water tender or whatever it was, uh, said he would come back down to the ship and be there for that inspection because he and I were the only two people that would be qualified to see this.
Mhm.
And so he did. And that was when there was no O'Hare. It was the airport for Chicago was at 6300 South. And so he came in. He was luckily he lived in Tarzana, California. Never heard of it. But he came down for the test so that I could go home. I left on Friday, got married on Saturday, uh, opened presents on Sunday, and flew back to San Diego on Monday.
Oh, wow.
And if he had said, "Gee, I don't feel qualified," I would have had to stay there.
Yeah. It's a lot of dedication.
Yeah.
Is there a picture in your book that you would like to show?
Well, it showed you the map.
So here is a map of the places that he went.
And because going from now, I didn't realize that the equator ran through Brazil. I never realized that.
So how did your time in the Navy shape your worldview versus from where you grew up?
Well, that was part of it. Well, this other thing is this. Uh, Somebody that has crossed the equator is called a shellback. Just the term, and it's something. And I am a shellback because I crossed it 4 times, but up and back generally we only count it as one.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that the equator ran through Brazil, and at the time that I was a midshipman, uh, our relationships with Cuba were a lot different than they are today. And one of our Navy's largest training camps was in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were there, and so when I off in America, and then over here down to New Zealand on that trip again, and then uh, they're all praying for uh there, and that is a certificate that we get.
What was the certificate for?
I think that one's for crossing the equator.
Oh.
And there's a ceremony that goes in. The ceremony is something else. And then and the other side, at the other end, the Knights of the Golden Dragon, that's having crossed the international date line.
Oh, that's very cool.
So
So do you think your time in the Navy broadened your worldview?
uh, it brought in a different view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that. I will say that I do not regret having been in the Navy. Uh, and I feel the people that have been in the service are a little more practical, a little more grown up for their age, that kind of thing. I have a granddaughter who is a licensed chiropractor. Okay, what's that got to do with life? Nothing. But on this thing, uh, she ended up, and she has a, a very close boyfriend who spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. And you can tell it right off the bat. He doesn't brag about it. Yet you see all these guys that, yeah, it's that they have put their act together
They're
and they
better off
know what's
for it.
going on. And I think that's important.
Mhm. What do you consider to be your most important contribution during your time in service?
Keeping, we really didn't know at that point in Formosa, that's what Taiwan was called. And that's where General Chiang Kai shek and his army went when the communists started taking over China.
Hmm.
And we were never sure whether we were supposed to keep him from going back and invading China or whether China was coming the other way and trying to invade him. But it was good. And it was uh, it was a great experience. It was well worth it. Uh, the only one of the biggest disadvantages of being on a destroyer is they say being on a ship is like being on a city. Uh, not on a destroyer because you don't have all the little bells and whistles. For example, uh, we didn't have any ice cream.
Oh no.
Uh, and all the big ships had ship stores, and you could get ice cream, and you could get that. It's not like that on a destroyer.
So after your time in service, what was it like to transition into civilian life?
Well, you lost that feeling of, or at least I lost that feeling of it's important to do your job and not to take any shortcuts that are really questionable. And it can be very interesting.
Hmm.
But I liked it,
Yeah.
and it's worth the experience. It's too bad. Oh gosh, I was just with somebody who has a friend who will be the first woman ever to be the skipper of an aircraft carrier.
Wow. Yeah, it's great how everyone's able to join now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, in closing, this has been an interview of John H. Farrow regarding his service during the Cold War. My name is Sarah Jacobs. The time is 2:07. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Well, thank you for being interested enough and thinking of this as a career to join this bell tower group. and
Recording stopped.
that's important.
Oh,